The story begins with Professor Edward Serfin teaching a class at the Regarden Magical Academy, located in the town of Herbs Regarden. He explains that by infusing small amounts of magic into a specific ore, one can produce sulfur, an excellent catalyst for fire. The professor, looking for a volunteer, calls on Will Sefort to demonstrate the process. However, Will is lost in a daydream and doesn't respond immediately, forcing Edward to call on him repeatedly. When Will finally wakes up and comes to the front of the class, he simply stares at the materials for the experiment. Edward, frustrated, asks why Will isn't doing anything since manipulating flame using the catalyst should be easy. When Will tries to summon a flame with his wand, he fails miserably, leading the entire class to laugh at him. Annoyed, Edward demands silence and expresses disbelief that a student of their esteemed academy can't perform even a basic spell. He then mocks Will, calling him someone who excels only in theory but lacks any real magical ability. As a wisecracking student named Cian Alster completes the experiment effortlessly from his desk using his fire magic, Edward scolds him for acting on his own. Cian smirks, apologizing insincerely, saying he just wanted to help since Will seemed to be struggling. Edward then extinguishes Cian's flame and lectures the class that in their world, magic is supreme, and those without magical talent have no place at the academy, even if they possess knowledge. He warns that fools who chase impossible dreams should leave immediately. After class, Will leaves the classroom and is soon met by Cian and his two lackeys. Cian mocks him for going into the dungeon again, implying that fighting weak monsters for credits is embarrassing. Before the bullying can escalate, a girl named Colette comes to Will's defense, telling Cian to stop. Cian sneers, asking why someone as prestigious as Colette is defending someone like Will. Cian dismisses her, claiming that kindness and hard work won't help someone become a great mage or achieve an unattainable dream like becoming a magia vendor. As Colette walks with Will afterward, she encourages him not to let Cian and the others get to him, criticizing Professor Edward as well. Will, however, admits that they're right, he can't use magic. He jokingly adds that he's lucky to have a cute girl like Colette worrying about him, which flusters her. She tells him that flattery won't get him anywhere and warns him not to compliment other girls so freely. As they walk, Will gazes at the sky, mentioning how beautiful it is. In the distance, they see a massive tower, home to the 5 greatest wizards of the world, known as Magia Vanders, who uphold the sky. The narrative explains that long ago, the world lived in fear of the celestial host, and the sky was unknown. 5 wizards rose up, defeating the celestial invaders, sealing the sky, and bringing peace. These wizards were honored with the title of Magia Vander, a highest accolade, and every mage dreams of achieving it. Colette asks Will if the ice maiden Alfaria Albez, one of the Magia Vanders, is watching over them today. Will reminisces about his past with Alfaria, a childhood friend who had once told him about the real sky, the sun, and the moon beyond the sealed sky. Alfaria had promised they would see the sunset together one day if they became Magia Vanders. Though Will admits that it was a childish dream, Alfaria had the talent to achieve it and became the youngest Magia Vander in history, while Will, without magical ability, remains a dreamer. The scene shifts to another professor, Werkner, reprimanding Will for venturing as far as the 7th floor of the dungeon. Will apologizes, but Werkner warns him that he'll get himself killed at this rate. When Werkner confirms that Will defeated one evil guard and earned 2 credits, Will is thrilled. However, Werkner questions if Will still dreams of becoming a Magia Vander. Will wonders if that's wrong, and Werkner explains that to achieve such a dream, Will needs to advance to the Upper Institute, requiring many credits and mastery in spellwork, something impossible without magic. Will argues that's why he's trying to earn credits through practice, but Werkner warns that advancing through practice credits alone is nearly impossible, especially for someone without magic. He doubts whether Will can even graduate, pointing out that Will still lacks the credits needed to pass his next exam. Will realizes he only has 2 days to earn 4 more credits, so he searches his notes for a monster worth that much. Werkner hints that a Baskerville recently appeared on the 6th floor, and no one has taken it down yet. Overjoyed, Will thanks Werkner, and Cian, who had been eavesdropping, hears this as well. Cian plans to hunt the monster first to ensure Will is expelled. Later, Will ventures into the dungeon at night, confident that he can defeat the Baskerville, as he's faced one before. His cat companion, Kiki, is less enthusiastic, having been burned by the Baskerville's breath. Meanwhile, Cian and his lackeys enter the dungeon, determined to beat Will. One of Cian's lackeys expresses concern about facing the Baskerville with just 3 people, but Cian silences him. As they press on, Cian casts a spell to locate the Baskerville, but before he can, an evil sentinel ambushes them, injuring one of his lackeys. Cian desperately fires spells at the monster, but they are ineffective. Will hears the commotion and rushes to the scene, recognizing the terrifying sentinel, which is worth 10 credits. Although Cian is paralyzed with fear, Will debates whether he should help him, considering how Cian has ridiculed him. He recalls Alfaria calling him kind and brave, though he feels unworthy of those descriptions. Ultimately, Will steps in and blocks the sentinel's attack. Back at the academy, Edward informs Werkner that Cian and his friends have entered the dungeon without permission. Werkner, however, is unconcerned and uses a crystal to observe the situation. Through the crystal, they watch as Will fights the sentinel, landing several blows without much effect. Eventually, Will cuts off the monster's finger and continues dodging its attacks. He uses his agility to outmaneuver the sentinel, finally stabbing it. Cian, watching in disbelief, wonders if this is the same Will he knows. Edward, also stunned, learns from Werkner that Will is an anomaly. Despite lacking magic, he has superhuman strength, the endurance of a dwarf, and exceptional observational skills. Werkner explains that Will is the only warrior in this world of magic. Will predicts the sentinel's next move, cutting off its hand and disarming it. He then slices through the sentinel's beam and destroys the monster with a single strike. Offering Cian a hand, Will tries to help him up, but Cian, humiliated, is furious at Will's strength. Back at the academy, Edward leaves Werkner's office, pondering how someone without magic could surpass magic itself. The next morning, Werkner scolds Will again, but awards him 10 credits for slaying the sentinel, though he knows it won't stop Will's stubborn pursuit of his dream. 5 years ago, we see that Will was also tormented by his peers at the academy. They ridiculed him for his inability to use magic, questioning why he was even there. Some speculated that he was merely brought in to lure Alfaria to the academy. One day, Headmaster Cauldron Janib summoned him and Professor Werkner to her office. She handed Will a knife and immediately launched multiple spells at him. Will protected Werkner and sliced through the spells one by one, leaving Werkner astonished. The headmaster laughed, approving Will's continued enrollment. Werkner asked if she was certain, reminding her that Will couldn't use magic. Cauldron, however, stated that it was enjoyable to see someone gifted with the sword rather than the wand. Will, with teary eyes, asked if studying magic at the academy would enable him to climb the tower and catch up to Alfaria. As they left her office, Cauldron apologized to someone unseen, remarking that it was their fault for not looking after Will, and she wondered what the future would hold. The scene shifts to Professor Werkner explaining to the class that climbing the tower means advancing to the Upper Institute, their first step toward becoming a magia vendor. He elaborated that there were 2 ways to achieve this: inventing a new type of magic or earning 7,200 credits at the academy. He noted that while only a few students would manage the former, most focused on accumulating credits. However, he emphasized that the students in his class weren't even close to being ready for graduation. After class, Will meets Colette outside. She wonders if the class was tough again, and Will admits it was, with continuous practice tests and magical drills. Colette remarks that Professor Werkner is strict, but Will points out that the professor is kind enough to offer remedial lessons, something most professors wouldn't do. They then encounter Cian and his group. One of Cian's lackeys boasts to some students that Cian defeated an evil sentinel. The students are impressed, and the lackey explains that although he was knocked out by the monster, when he awoke, Cian had already vanquished it. He spots Will walking by, which angers him. He grabs Will by the collar, accusing him of messing with him. Will stays silent, and Colette asks Cian what he's trying to do. Cian eventually lets go of Will and storms off. Colette asks if something happened between them, but Will brushes it off, saying it was nothing significant. Later, the scene shifts to Professor Edward requesting Will's expulsion from the academy. The headmaster, puzzled by this sudden suggestion, refuses, noting that Will is in his 6th and final year. Edward argues that Will doesn't belong at the academy since he's a warrior, not a mage, and that he seeks to surpass mages with his sword. The headmaster reviews Will's academic records, noting his consistently high scores in writing and insightful reports. She muses that, despite his inability to use magic, Will shows potential as an artificer or healer, with endless possibilities. Edward acknowledges this but insists the issue is Will's desire to become a Magiavander. The headmaster agrees that this poses a problem and tells Edward to test Will himself. If Will fails, she says, she will leave his fate in Edward's hands. The scene then cuts to Colette using her magic to open Will's locker for him so he can store his books. She notices that this is where he keeps his sword and asks if he's still slaying monsters in the dungeon. Will confirms this but adds that he doesn't have permission to use the sword on campus. The scene transitions to the study hall, where Will immerses himself in a book about the Battle of Garzaro. He explains to Colette that although they've already learned about the battle in class, he's diving deeper into the topic. Colette tells him that his writing is already better than hers, so he doesn't need to overwork himself, and he relates to the dwarves' dissatisfaction with being overworked. He declares that the power of perseverance is stronger than magic itself. Colette teases him, asking if Professor Werkner taught him that, and she notices a strand of white hair on his head. Concerned that he's overworking himself, she tries to pluck it, but Will refuses her offer. Professor Edward arrives. He demands that Will accompany him to the spell hall. The scene cuts to the spell hall, where Edward announces that he's going to give Will remedial lessons because he can't stand to see him fail at spellwork. Suspicious, Will hesitates, and Edward attacks him with a warning shot. Edward then lays out the terms. Will must land an attack on him. If he succeeds, he'll earn 5 credits, if he fails, he'll be expelled. Without waiting for a response, Edward prepares a spell, telling Will that someone with no talent like him should never aspire to be a Magiavander. Meanwhile, in the headmaster's office, Werkner enters, concerned about Will's well-being. The headmaster shows him a broadcast of Will's fight against Edward. Werkner is alarmed but is forbidden to intervene. The headmaster explains that Edward wants to test Will's worthiness, just as she allowed Werkner to look after Will. But Edward's test is too cruel since Edward was a man who nearly became a Magiavander himself. Although he ultimately failed, he made it to the top of the tower, making him an ascendant. Edward attacks, and Will narrowly dodges. Will realizes that although Edward is using low-level magic, the spells are still potent. He tries to kick Edward but can't breach his magical barrier. Edward lands a hit on Will, who stays conscious but struggles. Will notices that Edward is casting without incantations and at a speed that leaves no opening. Desperately, Will ponders how he can land a hit on such a powerful opponent. Edward tells Will that he's only using 2 spells, one for attack and one for defense. He explains that if a mage can't master 1,000 spells, they should focus on perfecting one, making it as versatile as 1,000. He wishes he had his sword with him. Back in the locker room, Colette worries about Will's safety. She blushes, imagining him being tortured by Edward. When Kiki returns, injured, she suspects something is wrong and retrieves Will's sword from his locker. At the spell hall, Edward continues to taunt Will, saying that if he can't surpass him, he'll never have any hope of becoming a Magiavander. He compares the dwarves' revolt and the Battle of Garzaro, where 10,000 dwarves were stopped by a single mage. Edward steps on Will's head, telling him to admit that the wand is mightier than the sword and to give up on his ambitions. But Will refuses to yield. He declares that he still wants to become a Magiavander. Edward, surprised, asks what drives him to pursue such a goal and whether he has some noble cause. With a determined look, Will reveals that he simply wants to be with the girl he loves. Edward is stunned by this confession, unable to believe that Will strives to reach the pinnacle of magic for such a trivial reason. Will resolutely states that for him, this reason is more than enough, and he vows to watch the sunset with Alfaria from the top of the tower one day. Colette hands Will his sword, and he prepares to give everything he has. Edward attacks again, but Will slices through the spell, shocking Edward. Realizing that Will wields a Moria sword, Edward braces for another confrontation. Will, trembling with fear, acknowledges that this is the wall he must overcome if he is to achieve his dream. Although every fiber of his being wants to flee, he knows he must press forward. Edward launches another barrage, but Will dodges them while closing in. He recalls more of the Battle of Garzaro, explaining that despite the mage's overwhelming power, the dwarven general Gareth didn't give up. Gareth managed to land a single blow on the mage, earning his respect. Will believes that in that moment, the sword was equal to the wand. With a single powerful strike, Will shatters Edward's barrier and lands a hit, scratching Edward. Though displeased, Edward awards Will 5 credits and leaves. Colette rushes to check on Will, noticing that he's not all right despite his success. The headmaster ends the broadcast of their fight, both she and Werkner are astonished by Will's strength. The headmaster muses that Will truly possesses an indomitable will. Outside the Magical Academy dorms, Rosti prepares food for Will, hoping he returns soon. Will, meanwhile, reflects on the day Alfaria left for the tower. Before she departed, he promised her that he would climb the tower, even without magic. When he does, they will watch the sunset together. Alfaria, with teary eyes and a smile, assured him she would always wait for him. Will is distributing newspapers throughout the city to support himself. During his rounds, he meets a man named Donan, who encourages him to keep working hard and tells him that he'll see Will at Gina's place tomorrow. As Will continues, he stumbles on some stairs but doesn't fall, using his exceptional skills to prevent the newspapers from scattering, except for one, which slips out of his grasp. He picks it up and reads the headline, discovering that Alfaria has developed 12 new types of magic spells. This revelation makes him realize how hard she's working. The scene cuts to Will in his dorm room. He asks Rosti if he can prepare a magical item for him, explaining that he's in a hurry. As he changes his clothes, Will tells Rosti that Alfaria has placed an order with the academy, and he plans to skip classes to venture into the labyrinth to gather ice cores from the Frostwalkers. He further explains that Alfaria needs numerous magical catalysts. Seeing the determination in Will's eyes, Rosti can't refuse and hands over the magic item, mentioning that he's made some upgrades since the last time. Will thanks him for the improvements, and before leaving, Rosti hands him some bread for breakfast. The scene transitions to a brief reflection on the words of the Mage Queen, Mercedes, who once said that everything comes from the dungeon. She encouraged everyone to conquer the dungeon using their knowledge. Now on the 4th floor of the dungeon, Will observes numerous students battling Frostwalkers. He deduces that this must be due to Alfaria's orders and marvels at how she can rally so many people with a single command. Among the students, he spots Cyan, who is effortlessly obliterating the Frostwalkers with his fire spells. Cyan, however, feels these weak creatures won't help him grow stronger and recalls how formidable Will was. Sensing Cyan's power and bloodlust, Will realizes he won't be able to hunt any Frostwalkers in this area, so he ventures deeper into the dungeon. There, Will finds a female student being attacked by monsters. He swiftly slays the creatures, so quickly that the girl can't even comprehend what just happened. She eventually notices Will and realizes that what she witnessed wasn't magic but swordsmanship. Will asks if she's alright, and the girl nervously confirms that she's fine, thanking him for saving her. Will introduces himself, and the girl reveals her name. She's Iris Churchill, a 4th-year student. Meanwhile, back at the academy, Professor Werkner is conducting a class, though many students are absent due to Alfaria's recent request. He explains to the remaining students that creating new magic is such a significant achievement that it grants one the right to ascend the tower without further conditions. He further elaborates that new spells are often named after their creators, using Dax Darence as an example, a spell named after the ancient mage Darence. He encourages the students to leave their mark in history by creating new magic. Rose then comments on the news about Alfaria from that morning, mentioning how amazing it is that she created 12 new spells. Rose teases Colette, suggesting that she might be jealous, thinking Alfaria could take Will away. Flustered, Colette denies it, but can't help wondering if Will went to the dungeon today for Alfaria's sake. Back in the dungeon, Iris realizes that Will is the same book learner with no magical talent she's heard about. Will is a bit offended by this but soon learns that Iris is a 4th-year student. Curious, he asks if his lack of magic talent bothers her, but she casually dismisses it, stating she can't look down on someone who just saved her. She admires Will's talent, despite his inability to use magic, and respects him for it. Will is a little surprised by her easygoing attitude and asks if she, too, is in the dungeon because of Alfaria's orders. Iris then shares that she once met Alfaria in the dungeon. She recounts how she was surrounded by monsters and had accepted her fate when Alfaria suddenly appeared and froze all the creatures in an instant. She remembers how Alfaria helped her up and advised her to be more careful in the future. As Iris gushes about the encounter, Kiki, Will's familiar, notices something. Will goes to investigate, and Iris continues to talk excitedly. She mentions that despite her efforts, she hasn't found a single Frostwalker, so she asks Will what he's doing. Will explains that Frostwalkers leave behind tiny ice shards, typically between 0.5 and 1 millimeter in size, but he's found a shard twice as large. Preparing his magic item, Will spots the Frostwalker clinging to the ceiling. As it attacks them, Will saves Iris, who identifies the monster as a Frost Rex, an advanced subspecies of the Frostwalker. She explains that the creature is worth 6 credits and is the boss of this floor. The Frost Rex roars and fires a beam of freezing energy at them. Will dodges with Iris in tow and then sets her down, ready to face the creature. Iris warns him that physical attacks won't work against the Frost Rex, adding that it's also known as a dwarf killer and can freeze people with a single touch. However, Will confidently assures her that he has defeated creatures like this many times before. The Frost Rex unleashes another beam attack, but Will dodges and moves beneath the creature. The monster begins attacking wildly, unable to pinpoint Will's location. While Iris and Kiki dodge the creature's attacks, Will attaches his magic item to the Frost Rex and begins winding it up with a wire. He explains that the Frost Rex is vulnerable to fire and explosives. As the monster tries to freeze him, Will ignites the wire, triggering an explosion that obliterates the Frost Rex. Will reflects on how incredible Rosty's magic items are. Iris, now more serious, considers how different Will is from the rumors she's heard about him. She wonders how she should report this encounter. Will, oblivious to her thoughts, suggests they head back. The scene then cuts to Iris walking into a room within the tower known as Mercedes Callis. As she walks, her appearance changes. It's revealed that she was undercover at the academy to identify talented magicians. Entering a chamber where 4 of the 5 Magia Vanders have gathered, she greets them. Carrot, one of the Vanders, reassures her that she's not interrupting. Zeal mentions that the celestial hosts are likely watching them from the other side. Eleanor adds that they need elite mages for the fated day, when the barriers fall will become a reality. They turn to Iris, asking if she's found anyone worth recruiting. Iris informs them of a no-talent she discovered, Wilfur. Carrot and Eleanor are reluctant, hesitant about inviting someone with no magical talent, but Zeal finds it intriguing. Eleanor, annoyed, says she doesn't want any more inferior goods around her. Carrot intervenes, ending the argument by suggesting they wait until the Grand Magic Festival to decide. Alfaria is the last to remain in the room. Iris informs her that the boy Alfaria once told her about is truly exceptional. Holding the magic core Will collected, Alfaria thinks to herself that she will be waiting for him. We then see Will's classmates taking a test to earn credits. After defeating some golems, Cian has amassed a total of 9,889 credits, qualifying him for the higher academy. Colette also qualifies with 7,340 credits. Meanwhile, Will is seen battling a golem for his own credits. He attempts to punch the golem, but some of his classmates mock him for this, distracting him, allowing the golem to land a blow. The bullies laugh, saying this is what they expect from a mere learner. 2 other students, Liana Enos and Winolander, also defeat some golems using lightning and wind magic. Liana has a total of 10,100 credits, and Wino has 10,075 credits, meaning they both qualify for the higher academy as well. A student named Julius Reinberg then uses his ice magic to plant roses in all the golems. He activates the roses simultaneously, freezing the golems in one swoop. Julius has a total of 10,048 credits and also passes to the higher academy. Liana remarks that they don't seem to be slacking, and Wino mentions that it's because the grand banquet is approaching. We learn that the 3 of them, Liana, Wino, and Julius, are the top students of the year. Julius boldly declares a challenge to the other 2, vowing to use his newly mastered trump card to defeat them. He conjures an ice rose as a glove to back up his challenge, but Liana and Wino destroy it with their magic and accept the challenge. Other students take notice, remarking that this is what they expect from the top 3, who are the only students with more than 10,000 credits. Cian, however, is visibly displeased to be trailing behind them. We then learn that Will has only accumulated a total of 545 credits, not nearly enough to graduate. He grows disheartened, realizing this is his last year at the academy. Kiki tries to cheer him up, but Julius and his lackeys cross paths with Will and rudely demand he move out of the way. Will obliges, and they walk past. Julius's lackey praises him, certain that he will be scouted at the upcoming Grand Magic Games. Hearing this, Will recalls that the games are happening soon. The scene then shifts to the cafeteria where Colette is eating lunch with Will. She tells him that his only real chance to move forward is to get scouted at the Grand Magic Games. She explains that it was never realistic to earn enough credits solely from praise and writing. She mentions that some students with fewer credits have been scouted during the games. Will agrees, knowing that the games are a major opportunity, and observes that everyone around him in the cafeteria is buzzing with talk of the event. It's explained that the Grand Magic Games take place every 2 years at Rigard Magic Academy and feature various contests. High mages from the tower attend to scout promising students. There are 4 major factions: Albazvina, the Ice faction, and India, the Fire faction, Elif Khan, the Elf faction, and the Rufes, the Thunder faction, each led by a current Magi Evander. She tells Will that if one of these factions picks him, he'll be guaranteed a place in the tower. Will, however, doubts that anyone will pick him given that other students have far more credits. He laments that he would need to perform some incredible magic to get noticed, but Colette reminds him there are other ways to stand out. She mentions that Watchers descend to scout for hidden talents. Will, though, is skeptical, reminding her that Watchers are just one of the Academy's 7 mysteries. He insists that as someone without magic talent, he has no place in the games, and he expects to be behind the scenes once again helping with the preparations. Colette urges him to reconsider, stating that if he participates, he could change what people think of him. Will thanks her for her concern but argues that even if he enters, he'll only be seen as an athletic contestant. The festival is for mages, not for people like him. Will then recalls the Grand Magic Games during his 2nd year, where the audience accused him of cheating and even threw garbage at him. Colette remarks that it was the most awful games ever, and Will admits that this incident marked the start of his bad reputation, something he still hasn't fully gotten over. We then see students giving their all to prepare for the games, creating an air of excitement. Colette and Will notice the intense atmosphere, and Colette mentions that even if they don't get scouted by the 4 main factions, they still have a chance to take on other careers, as many scouts from the capital will attend. They later head to the locker room, where Will insists again that he can't enter the games since he can't use magic. While storing his books, Colette notices that one of the lockers has a barrier spell layered with a soundproofing spell. Kiki breaks the spell, revealing a set of stairs leading downward. Will and Colette decide to investigate and find a hidden gambling ring where students are betting on the winner of the Grand Magic Games. The host encourages everyone to place their bets, and most students bet on the top 3. Colette realizes that the gambling circuit was hidden here because the teachers don't inspect the students' locker rooms. Will is surprised to see that Cian is there as well, and Cian is equally surprised by Will's presence. Before Cian can bully Will, Colette intervenes, warning him not to harm Will or face her wrath. Cian begrudgingly backs off, and Will asks what he's doing there if he isn't interested in betting. Cian's lackeys inadvertently reveal that he's there to check the betting odds and compare himself to the top 3 students. Cian silences them before they can say more. Colette teases Cian, understanding his competitiveness as a boy. Cian justifies that the only reason he's behind the top 3 in credits is because he failed a writing test, emphasizing that he is their equal in magic. He then leaves with his lackeys, muttering that he doesn't know why he even bothered explaining things to Will. Later, Will is attending a potions class. After class, Colette shyly invites him to explore the dungeon with her, but Will declines, explaining that he has to work at Gina's tavern that evening. Colette pouts in disappointment. The scene then shifts to Gina's tavern on Slum Street. Will observes the overworked dwarven miners laughing and drinking as usual. He works as a waiter there, serving Donan's order. Donan sympathizes with Will, commenting that he must have it tough, juggling newspaper delivery in the mornings, work at the tavern at night, and academy classes. Will explains that it's necessary since he didn't qualify for the scholarship and has to work to pay his tuition. Donan mentions that the Grand Magic Games are approaching again and wonders if Will plans to participate. Will responds that he's not interested. At that moment, Gina calls out, angrily reminding Will to get back to work as there are other customers waiting. She points out that the friend Will brought along is working harder than him. It turns out that Rosti is also helping out, filling in for a missing waiter. Will apologizes to Rosti for dragging him into the situation, but Rosti doesn't mind, saying he couldn't ignore his roommate when he needed help. Gina asks Will to find another helper since one of her workers recently quit. However, the dwarves at the tavern insist that Will can handle the work of 2 people. They treat him like a brother, as he, like them, cannot use magic. The scene then shifts to Will and Rosti washing dishes after the tavern has nearly emptied. Rosti questions whether Will is sure about continuing to work there, pointing out that dwarven establishments don't pay much and suggesting he ask Professor Wagner for help finding a better paying job. Will doesn't want to trouble the professor over something so trivial and admits he enjoys the company of the dwarves, who are honest, enjoy drinking, and are skilled with their hands. Just then, Julius and his lackeys enter the tavern. Julius sneers at the shabby establishment, but his lackeys explain that no other restaurants are open this late. They spot Will and are surprised to see him working there. Julius condescendingly remarks that this is the perfect place for him, among barbarians like the dwarves. Donan is visibly angered by the insult, but the other dwarves restrain him from reacting. Julius, feeling superior, looks down on the dwarves, reminding them that they are refugees from another world, given a place to live by humans. It's explained that the dwarves' homeland was destroyed by the celestial host long ago, forcing them to seek refuge in this world. Unlike elves, dwarves are treated with contempt, and any offense against a mage could lead to severe consequences for their entire race. Julius arrogantly orders the waiter to bring food and drinks, and Rosti serves them a dish of beans. Julius and his lackeys are repulsed by the barbaric dish, mocking the dwarves for their supposedly poor taste. Julius cruelly states that the dwarves' sweat reeks even more than their food. Will, incensed, takes off his apron. Julius, smug and scornful, tells the dwarves to leave the country. Will approaches Julius's table, and the lackeys, confused, ask what he wants. Will, angry but determined, demands that Julius take back his words. He defends the dwarves, saying they work hard and grow their beans with skill and dedication. Will refuses to let Julius belittle their efforts. Amused by Will's defiance, Julius mocks him for siding with people who, like him, can't use magic. He kicks the plate of beans onto Will, but Will stands firm. Julius's lackeys try to force Will to leave, but Will swiftly knocks them both to the ground, spilling beer onto Julius. Furious, Julius states that it's been a long time since anyone humiliated him like this. He freezes the entire tavern with his magic and attacks Will. However, Will dodges the attacks, continuing to evade as Julius grows angrier. Julius manages to pin Will to a wall, ready to freeze him with an ice rose. But seeing the defiant look in Will's eyes, Julius halts, realizing that simply freezing him won't satisfy him. Instead, Julius challenges Will to participate in the Grand Magic Games, vowing to humiliate him in front of everyone. Will agrees to the challenge, promising that if he wins, Julius will have to apologize to Donan and the dwarves. Julius smirks, stating that if he wins, Will might be forced to quit the academy. This is it for this video. Make sure to like and subscribe for another part.